Well, ladies and gentlemen, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and President Joe Biden have reached a deal that will allow the United States government to increase the debt limit so that we do not default on our national debt. Hooray! My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk. Today is Sunday, May 28th. Normally, I don't do a video on the weekend as I figure everybody needs a rest from the news. But since this has been pressing out there and since this broke late Saturday night, I wanted to get out today, get a video out to you, and just let you know kind of where this thing stands and what exactly is going on. From Politico, a headline: McCarthy and Biden reach deal agreement in principle on debt limit. Now, as you may have been watching in the news lately, there's been a lot going on. We are about to reach the point where the United States Treasury can no longer borrow money to pay the bills of the federal government. So there's been negotiation going on between a Republican House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, and the Democratic President, Joe Biden. Well, it seems that the negotiations have reached a conclusion. Now, whether everybody's going to be satisfied with that conclusion is entirely another question. But as of late Saturday night, Kevin McCarthy announced that they've reached a deal in principle with the White House. Now, let's get into some of what that looks like and then give you some reaction, and I'm going to give you my take on the whole thing. So, from Politico, we read the following. Here are the 6 must-know provisions of the new debt ceiling deal. The policy provisions of the agreement between President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy appear to fall short of conservative demands. There's my first worry. The debt ceiling deal that Joe Biden and Kevin McCarthy struck late Saturday night is a true meet-you-halfway compromise between the stark ultimatums the leaders have issued for months. A far cry from the clean increase Biden sought for the nation's $31.4 trillion borrowing cap, the bipartisan agreement is also much less punchy than the sweeping package the House Republicans passed last month, as they demanded drastic spending cuts, major changes to energy permitting, and to an end to many of Biden's signature accomplishments, including the student loan forgiveness and pieces of the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, as far as the major pieces of this are concerned, work requirements. The deal would tighten restrictions for the SNAP food assistance program, as well as emergency cash aid as temporary assistance for needy families. New time limits would be phased in for people without children up to age 54 to receive food assistance through SNAP if they do not complete certain work requirements. This is something Republicans have been pushing for years. Democrats secured some exemptions for homeless people and veterans. Republicans also pushed for new work requirements on Medicaid, but the White House made it clear early on it would not negotiate. Energy permitting. The deal also appears to offer no major advances in one policy issue where both Democrats and Republicans had hoped to find agreement, speeding up the process of issuing federal permits for energy projects. A little bit further into this, COVID aid clawbacks. The deal would cut back millions of dollars of unspent COVID relief Congress had doled out since 2020, impacting a wide range of current and future health efforts. Another major aspect of it, IRS cuts. A portion of the $80 billion in funding Democrats pushed through for the IRS last year would be clawed back. That pot of money is supposed to help the agency supercharge its ability to go after wealthy tax cheats, modernize its IT systems, and improve customer service. Now, here's the heart of the deal. Spending caps. For Republicans, the 2-year budget accord is a far cry from the $130 billion in spending cuts the party first sought for the coming fiscal year and fails to limit spending for the decade in as many GOP lawmakers wanted. Instead, it keeps non-defense funding largely flat for the fiscal year that begins in October at about $637 billion. Defense funding would be capped in the Biden budget request at $886, about a 3.5% increase. Veterans medical care would also match the president's request at $121 billion. Non-defense spending would increase by 1% in 2025, followed by years of non-enforceable funding targets. Congress would have to pass all 12 of its annual funding bills by the end of January or face a stopgap measure that cuts spending by 1% across the board. Student loans. Conservatives have been trying to use the debt ceiling to force the White House to retreat on Biden's plan to cancel up to $20,000 of student loan debt for tens of millions of Americans. The deal reached Saturday would leave that program unchanged, according to a person familiar with the negotiations. But the agreement does codify into law the Biden administration's plan to end the ongoing freeze on monthly student loan payments and interest at the end of the summer, according to a source familiar with the negotiations. Now, that's what we know about the deal so far. Now, they're still working out the text. There's going to be more conversations between the White House and the Speaker's office today. That's the rough outline of the deal. Now, let's take a look at what people are saying about this already, and I'm also going to give you my take. So hang on, folks. We'll get into all that in one moment. Now, the deal has been reached in principle between the White House and congressional Republicans. So what is everybody saying about it? Well, take a look at this. From a man who knows something about negotiating with Democratic presidents, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich took to Twitter and said, "The debt limit deal is a dramatic victory for Speaker McCarthy and House Republicans. Before they passed their history-changing bill, no one would have believed it possible to cut spending, reestablish work requirements, reform permitting for energy and infrastructure, and more." That may be a little bit optimistic, but okay, Newt. I'll give you that. Now, as far as what other people are saying about it, take a look at this. This is from U.S. Representative Ken Buck, Republican, Colorado. Let's take a look at this deal. Adds $4 trillion more to the debt, gives Democrats a pass until 2025 on the next debt limit increase, basically no spending cuts, and 98% of IRS expansion take place. If this isn't a major win for Joe Biden, then I don't know what would be. Now, I'll give Ken Buck this. He's got a valid point. You see, you've got to remember something about cutting spending in Washington, D.C. It's automatically built into law. There will be increases to spending. Now, what's being talked about here isn't cutting the actual amount of money in the federal budget. It's cutting the rate of growth, working from the assumption that you can outgrow your spending, which, okay, may or may not be true. But as far as actual real cuts, in other words, what you and I have to do every time we sit down at the table and say, here's the checkbook, here's what I got to spend it on, how am I going to make this work? No, all they're talking about is slowing the rate of growth. And I agree with Ken Buck on this. There's no reductions to spending in this, not really. Oh, you're getting a cap, but that cap's only good for 2 years. And like the article from Politico said, after 2025, those are more like guidelines, don't you know, to borrow a line from Pirates of the Caribbean. So yeah, there's things about this deal that are not to be made happy about. Now, this has been reached in principle. No one has seen the text of the bill yet. And I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. If this is what this deal constitutes, I'm sorry. If I were the House Republicans, I wouldn't vote for this, which is also part of what McCarthy's counting on. He's counting on that he can get Hakeem Jeffries to swing enough Democrats to come over with him, and between Hakeem Jeffries' Democrats and McCarthy's Republicans who would vote for it, they've got enough to get the thing out of the House. Remains to be seen. The Progressive Caucus isn't happy. A lot of the fiscal conservatives aren't real happy. But there is one thing about this deal that just bugs me to death. It's being done under a false pretense. Oh, what do you mean, front porch? They keep talking about we're going to default. We got to do this, or we're going to raise debt limit, or we're going to default. Really? Default on what? Let me show you something that I found when I was preparing this video, and it ought to give you pause, and it might open your eyes. Take a look at this. This is put together by a private organization. It's called Just Facts Daily. Everything you've heard about the debt limit is wrong. In an article written by James D. Agresti back on May the 9th, contrary to widespread claims that the U.S. government will default on its debt if Congress doesn't raise the debt limit, federal law and the Constitution require the Treasury to pay the debt. and it has ample tax revenue to do this. Nor would Social Security benefits be affected by a debt limit stalemate unless President Biden illegally diverts Social Security revenues to other programs. The debt limit is a valuable tool for transparency, accountability, and giving voters an ongoing say in how their money is spent. Now, I want to take you into the heart of this article because this is critical. In a section entitled The Default Farce, the author writes, the U.S. Treasury, which is responsible for managing the national debt, is part of the executive branch of the federal government, which is under the authority of President Biden. Biden alleges that unless the debt ceiling is raised, the government will, quote, default on its debt for the first time in the history of the United States. A default is a failure to meet a financial obligation, particularly paying a debt. In concert with Biden, scores of media outlets such as Politico, NPR, CNN, NBC, the New York Times, and the Washington Post have reported that not raising the debt limit would cause the government to default on its debt. And to make sure that they get the message, the New York Times recently ran this graphic at the top of its homepage. Yeah, this thing's just very intimidating. Now, listen to this next paragraph. In reality, however, federal law requires the Treasury to pay the debt, and the federal government has ample revenues to do so. So if there is a default, it's only because the Biden administration breaks the law. The federal law that governs the repayment on the national debt states the following. The faith of the United States government is pledged to pay in legal tender principal and interest on the obligations of the government issued under this chapter. The Secretary of the Treasury shall pay interest due or accrued on the public debt. The phrases pledged to pay and shall pay are definitive, unlike discretionary government programs from which money is, quote, appropriated and is sometimes not even spent. Moreover, listen to this. The federal government collected $5.1 trillion of revenues in 2022, while interest on the debt was $775 billion, roughly 15% of revenues. This reveals that the federal government has plenty of money to service its debt and trillions more for other expenses. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what has always bugged me about the debt limit default argument. Republicans are a bunch of intellectual cowards, and they always have been on this. This is what happens every time they go up against the Democrats. The Democrats take a word which has an established definition. They decouple them from each other. They take the definition, scramble it around to make it do what the Democrats want it to do, then take that newly formed definition, recouple it to the word, and then from there start a whole new narrative with it. And that's exactly what they've done. Oh, if we don't raise the debt limit, we're going to default. No, a default is if you don't pay a legally indebted obligation. By law, the Treasury Department has to pay the interest that's accrued on the debt. Okay, so let's stop and think about this. If that's what the definition of default is, that I don't, or the government doesn't pay its interest on the debt, then think about this. $5.1 trillion in revenue, $775 billion in interest on the debt. Ladies and gentlemen, we have more than enough money to pay the interest on the debt. Therefore, we cannot default unless the Treasury Department and the Biden administration choose not to pay it. What this gets down to is that Democrats and Republicans, they're both equally guilty in this. They do not want to prioritize spending. In other words, what you and I have to do every month, here's the checkbook, here are the bills, now how am I going to pay everything? That's what they don't want to do. They want to just keep on spending and raise the debt limit and keep on spending, raise the debt limit, keep on spending, and keep on going and going and going and going. And never be forced to actually sit down and figure out, okay, I've got X amount of money, here's what I've got to pay out, how do I do it? They don't want to cut anything. And that's what makes me mad about this. They are continuing this farce, and Republicans are letting Democrats get away with it. Keep in mind, Kevin McCarthy's got a long way to go to get this passed through the House of Representatives. But my advice to the Freedom Caucus and to fiscally conservative Republicans up there, don't vote for it. Don't vote for it. You're giving Joe Biden exactly what he wants. The ability to spend more money. Oh, he's spending it at less a rate than he might want to. He's still spending money. So no, this deal is no deal. It's no real deal for Americans. But that's what I think about it. What do you think? As I end this video, and keep in mind, we're going to be keeping this updated over the coming days. As we end this video, I ask you to do the following for me. Number 1, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please do so. Number 2, please hit the bell for notifications. Number 3, please leave a comment below. Number 4, share the video around if you think you've got friends that would enjoy this content. And number 5, please give me a thumbs up on the video. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative. I'll see you next time.